for joining us. I'm excited about today's program. The Duino Elegies by Rainer Maria Rilke, translated by Steve Mitchell, was published in 1923. It contains 10 elegies. Stephen Mitchell begins his foreword, quote, "The Duino Elegies are widely acknowledged to be the greatest poem of the 20th century," end of quote. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce the distinguished readers. They are, in order of appearance, Paul Evangelisti is the author of more than 30 books of poetry, as well as a noted translator from Italian. His book of poems, Motive and Opportunity, was published in fall 2020 by Shearsman Books in the UK. He lives in Pasadena. Phoebe McAdams was born in New York City, but has lived on the West Coast for most of her life, first in the San Francisco area and since 1986 in Southern Cali. She is a founding member of Cahuenga Press and has published 8 books of poetry. She has 2 sons, is a retired teacher, and lives with her husband and teaching partner, Ron Ozuna. Poet James Cushing retired last year after 31 years teaching literature and creative writing. His most recent collection of poetry is Solace from Cahuenga Press. Rilke has been in his poetry pantheon most of his life. Aram Saroyan's complete minimal poems received the William Carlos Williams Award from the Poetry Society of America. Richard Modiano is a native of Los Angeles. While a resident of New York City, he became active in the literary community connected to the Poetry Project, where he came to know Gregory Corso, Allen Ginsberg, Anne Waldman, William S. Burroughs, and Ted Berrigan. From 2010 to 2019, he served as executive director of Beyond Broke Literary Arts Center. In that time, he produced and curated hundreds of literary events. Garrett M. Brown is an actor and writer who began his life in the arts as a painter. He's had plays produced in Los Angeles and New York City. His novel, Tin Sea, will soon be published by Lagoon House Press. In 1994, in Holly Prado's writing workshop, he met the writer Marie Pal Brown, and they eventually married. Bob Beecher is a student and lover of poetry from all periods and in all languages. He has a special fondness for Rilke's work and considers the Duino Elegies as having equal importance as a poem like T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Bill Moore is a poet scholar who is a professor in the Department of English at California State University, Long Beach. His most recent book of poems is The Headwaters of Nirvana from What Books in Los Angeles. Corinne Conley began her career touring colleges and universities with the National Classic Theater from New York City. She went on to work in theater, TV, and film in Toronto, Canada, London, England, and Los Angeles. Marie Pal Brown is a writer and was a longtime student of Holly Prado. Born and raised near Cologne, Germany, her memoir, Daughter of the Enemy, was recently published by Lagoon House Press. Here's Paul Evangelisti.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you for inviting us all and doing this splendid event. It was December of 1911. The 36-year-old Rainer Maria Rilke had come to visit his indulgent friend and patron, Princess Marie von Thurn und Taxis Hohenlohe, who owned the castle at Duino on the extreme northeast coast of Italy near Trieste. After great successes with the groundbreaking new poems in 1907 and 1908, and the autobiographical novel The Notebooks of Malte Lorenz Brigge in 1910, almost 2 years had passed in which Rilke wrote little poetry. For a time, the princess left the poem alone at the castle, and as the legend goes, Rilke was wandering around the stormy cliffs when a voice rang through the winter gale. Filled with awe, Rilke took out his notebook and transcribed what he'd heard, becoming that night the opening lines of the first elegy. Literally, who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angelic orders? He would soon start work on the elegies, only to complete the project some 10 years later in Switzerland. As my colleagues here today have probably discovered, these are difficult poems, as the language is an enthralling mix of the colloquial and the philosophical. Curiously enough, the poems, particularly in Mitchell's translation, are somewhat harder to read aloud than to oneself. The verse line, as well as the syntax, is complex and demands very close attention. Also, the poet's voice is perplexing, the pronouns constantly shifting and varying, the verses sometimes speaking to Rilke, sometimes speaking for him. A few words here, per Harry's request, about the angels, or Engelsordnungen, excuse my German, the angelic orders that mark these poems from the very start. Rilke's angels are higher beings, beings not in the sci-fi sense, but in the philosophical or metaphysical sense, creatures who inhabit a more intense spiritual life of almost pure being, that overwhelming existence, to quote Rilke, rather than simple survival. Or, also in Rilke's own words, being with a more complete existence. Like beauty itself, which in these poems signals the beginning or first touch of terror. According to noted translator Art Beck, some of the elegies have a complexity of resonance and ambiguity that calls out for multiple interpretations. Perhaps performance is a better word for what a poetic translation of these poems demands. And if the objective is to enrich the English language, then there's room for as many performances of Rilke as, say, interpretations of Bach. These might be as varied as Wanda Landowska's, Glenn Gould's, Stephen Husong's, and John Lewis's, while remaining as recognizably Rilke as those versions remain essentially Bach. In a letter to an admirer, Rilke insisted, the interpretation always rests with the reader and must be free and unlimited. The more meanings there is room for in images such as the angels, the broader and more real they are. To paraphrase Rilke within our context, once the poet publishes the poem, the meaning of the angels rests entirely with the reader. The first elegy. Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angels' hierarchies? And even if one of them pressed me suddenly against his heart, I would be consumed in that overwhelming existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we still are just able to endure. And we are so awed because it serenely disdains to annihilate us. Every angel is terrifying. And so I hold myself back and swallow the call note of my dark sobbing. Ah, whom can we ever turn to in our need? Not angels, not humans, and already the knowing animals are aware that we are not really at home in our interpreted world. Perhaps there remains for us some tree on a hillside, which every day we can take into our vision. There remains for us yesterday's street and the loyalty of a habit so much at ease when it stayed with us and that it moved in and never left us. Oh, and night, there is night, when a wind full of infinite space gnaws at our faces. Whom would it not remain for, that longed after, mildly disillusioning presence which the solitary heart so painfully meets? Is it any less difficult for lovers? But they keep on using each other to hide their own fate. Don't you know yet? Fling the emptiness out of your arms into the spaces we breathe. Perhaps the birds will feel the expanded air with more passionate flying. Yes, the spring times needed you. Often a star was waiting for you to notice it, a wave rolling toward you out of the distant past, or as you walked under an open window, a violin yielded itself to your hearing. All this was mission. But could you accomplish it? Weren't you always distracted by the expectation, as if every event announced a beloved? Where can you find a place to keep her with all the huge, strange thoughts inside you going and coming and often staying all night? But when you feel longing, sing of women in love, for their famous passion is still not immortal. Sing of women abandoned and desolate. You envy them almost. Who could love so much more purely than those who were gratified? Begin again and again the never attainable praising. Remember, the hero lives on. Even his downfall was merely a pretext for achieving his final birth. But nature, spent and exhausted, takes lovers back into herself, as if there were nothing or enough strength to create them a second time. Have you imagined Gaspera Stampa intensely enough so that any girl deserted by her beloved might be inspired by that fierce example of soaring, objectless love, and might say to herself, perhaps I can be like her? Shouldn't this most ancient of sufferings finally grow more fruitful for us? Isn't it time that we lovingly freed ourselves from the beloved and quivering endured? As the arrow endures the bowstring's tension, so that gathered in the snap of release, it can be more than itself. For there is no place where we can remain. Voices, voices, listen, my heart, as only saints have listened, until the gigantic call lifted them off the ground, yet they kept on, impossibly, kneeling and didn't notice at all. So complete was their listening. Not that you could endure God's voice, far from it, but listen to the voice of the wind and the ceaseless message that forms itself out of silence. It is murmuring toward you now from those who died young. Didn't their fate, whenever you stepped into a church in Naples or Rome, quietly come to address you? Or high up, some eulogy entrusted you with a mission, as last year on that plaque in Santa Maria Formosa? What they want of me is that I gently remove the appearance of injustice about their death, which at times slightly hinders their souls from proceeding onward. Of course, it is strange to inhabit the earth no longer, to give up customs one barely had time to learn, not to see roses and other promising things in terms of a human future, no longer to be what one was in infinitely anxious hands, to leave even one's own first name behind, forgetting it as easily as a child abandons a broken toy. Strange to no longer desire one's desires. Strange to see meanings that clung together once, floating away in every direction. And being dead is hard work and full of retrieval before one can gradually feel a trace of eternity. Though the living are wrong to believe in the two sharp distinctions which they themselves have created. Angels, they say, don't know whether it is the living they are moving among or the dead. The eternal torrent whirls all ages along in it, though both realms forever, and their voices are drowned out in its thunderous roar. In the end, those who were carried off early no longer need us. They are weaned from earth's sorrows and joys as gently as children outgrow the soft breasts of their mothers. But we, who do need such great mysteries, we for whom grief is so often the source of our spirit's growth, could we exist without them? Is the legend meaningless that tells how, in the lament for Linus, the daring first notes of song pierced through the barren numbness, and then in the startled space, which a youth as lovely as a god had suddenly left forever, the void felt for the first time that harmony which now enraptures and comforts and helps us.
The second elegy. Every angel is terrifying, and yet, alas, I invoke you, most deadly birds of the soul, knowing about you. Where are the days of Tobias when one of you, veiling his radiance, stood at the front door, slightly disguised for the journey, no longer appalling? A young man like the one who curiously peeked through the window. But if the archangel now, perilous, from behind the stars, took even one step down toward us, our own heart, beating higher and higher, would beat us to death. Who are you? Early successes, creation's pampered favorites, mountain ranges, peaks growing red in the dawn of all beginning, pollen of the flowering Godhead, joints of pure light, corridors, stairways, thrones, space formed from essence, shields made of ecstasy, storms of emotion whirled into rapture, and suddenly alone, mirrors, which scoop up the beauty that has streamed from their face and gather it back into themselves entire. But we, when moved by deep feeling, evaporate. We breathe ourselves out and away. From moment to moment, our emotion grows fainter, like a perfume. Though somebody may tell us, yes, you've entered my bloodstream, the room, the whole springtime is filled with you. What does it matter? He can't contain us. We vanish inside him and around him. And those who are beautiful, oh, who can retain them? Appearance ceaselessly rises in their face and is gone. Like dew from the morning grass, what is ours floats into the air, like steam from a dish of hot food. Oh, smile, where are you going? Oh, upturned glance, new warm receding wave on the sea of the heart. Alas, but that is what we are. Does the infinite space we dissolve into taste of us then? Do the angels really reabsorb only the radiance that streamed out from themselves? Or sometimes, as if by an oversight, is there a trace of our essence in it as well? Are we mixed in with their features, even as slightly as that vague look in the faces of pregnant women? They do not notice it. How could they notice in their swirling return to themselves? Lovers, if they knew how, might utter strange, marvelous words in the night air, for it seems that everything hides us. Look, trees do exist. The houses that we live in still stand. We alone fly past all things, as fugitive as the wind. And all things conspire to keep silent about us. Half out of shame, perhaps, half as unutterable hope. Lovers, gratified in each other, I am asking you about us. You hold each other. Where is your proof? Look, sometimes I find that my hands have come aware of each other, or that my time-worn face shelters itself inside them. That gives me a slight sensation. But who would dare to exist just for that? You, though, who in each other's passion grow until overwhelmed, he begs you no more. You who beneath his hands swell with abundance like autumn grapes. You who may disappear because the other has wholly emerged. I am asking you about us. I know your touch so blissfully because the caress preserves, because the place you so tenderly cover does not vanish, because underneath it you feel pure duration. So you promise eternity, almost, from the embrace. And yet, when you have survived the terror of the first glances, the longing at the window, and the first walk together, once only, through the garden, lovers, are you the same? When you lift yourselves up to each other's mouth and your lips join, drink against drink, oh, how strangely each drinker seeps away from his action. Weren't you astonished by the caution of human gestures on attic gravestones? Wasn't love and departure placed so gently on soldiers that it seemed to be made of a different substance than in our world? Remember the hands, how weightlessly they rest, though there is power in the torsos. These self-mastered figures know we can go this far. This is ours, to touch one another this lightly. The gods can press down harder upon us, but this is the gods' affair. If only we too could discover a pure, contained human place, our own strip of fruit-bearing soil between river and rock. For our own heart always exceeds us as theirs did, and we can no longer follow it, gazing into images that soothe it, or into the godlike bodies where, measured more greatly, it achieves a greater repose.
Elegy. It is one thing to sing the beloved, another, alas, to invoke that hidden, guilty river god of the blood. Her young lover, whom she knows from far away, what does he know of the Lord of desire, who often, up from the depths of his solitude, even before she could soothe him, and as though she didn't exist, held up his head, dripping with the unknown, erect, and summoned the night to an endless uproar. Oh, the Neptune inside our blood with his appalling trident. Oh, the dark wind from his breast out of that spiraled conch. Listen to the night as it makes itself hollow. Oh, stars, isn't it from you that the lover's desire for the face of his beloved arises? Doesn't his secret insight into her pure features come from the pure constellations? Not you, his mother. Alas, you are not the one who bent the arch of his eyebrows into such expectation. Not for you, girl so aware of him. Not for your mouth did his lips curve themselves into a more fruitful expression. Do you really think that your gentle steps could have shaken him with such violence? You who move like the morning breeze? Yes, you did frighten his heart, but more ancient terrors plunged into him at the shock of that feeling. Call him, but you can't quite call him away from those dark companions. Of course, he wants to escape, and he does. Relieved, he nestles into your sheltering heart, takes hold, and begins himself. But did he ever begin himself? Really? Mother, you made him small. It was you who started him. In your sight he was new. Over his new eyes you arched the friendly world and warded off the world that was alien. Ah, where are the years when you shielded him just by placing your slender form between him and the surging abyss? How much you hid from him then. The room that filled with suspicion at night, you made it harmless. And out of the refuge of your heart, you mixed a more human space in with his night space. And you set down the lamp, not in that darkness, but in your own nearer presence. And it glowed at him like a friend. There wasn't a creak that your smile could not explain, as though you had long known just when the floor would do that. And he listened and was soothed. So powerful was your presence as you tenderly stood by the bed. His fate, tall and cloaked, retreated behind the wardrobe, and his restless future, delayed for a while, adapted to the folds of the curtain. And he himself, as he lay there, relieved, with the sweetness of the gentle world you had made for him dissolving beneath his drowsy eyelids into the foretaste of sleep, he seemed protected. But inside, who could ward off, who could divert the floods of origin inside him? Ah, there was no trace of caution in that sleeper. Sleeping, yes, but dreaming, but flushed with what fevers. How he threw himself in. All at once knew, trembling, how he was caught up and entangled in the spreading tendrils of inner event, already twined into patterns, into strangling undergrowth, prowling bestial shapes. How he submitted, loved his interior world, his interior wilderness, that primal forest inside him where among decayed tree trunks his heart stood, light green. Loved, left it, went through his own roots and out into the powerful source where his little birth had already been outlived. Loving, he waded down into more ancient blood to ravines where horror lay, still glutted with his fathers. And every terror knew him, winked at him like an accomplice. Yes, atrocity smiled. Seldom had you smiled so tenderly, mother. How could he help loving what smiled at him? Even before he knew you, he had loved it. For already, while you carried him inside you, it was dissolved in the water that makes the embryo weightless. No, we don't accomplish our love in a single year, as the flowers do. An immemorial sap flows up through our arms when we love. Dear girl, this, that we loved inside us, not one who would someday appear, but seething multitudes, not just a single child, but also the fathers laying in our depths like fallen mountains, also the dried up riverbeds of ancient mothers, also the whole soundless landscape under the clouded or clear sky of its destiny. All this, my dear, preceded you. And you, yourself, how could you know what primordial time you stirred in your lover? What passions welled up inside him from departed beings? What women hated you there? How many dark, sinister men you aroused in his young veins? Dead children reached out to touch you. Oh, gently, gently let him see you performing with love some confident daily task. Lead him out close to the garden. Give him what outweighs the heaviest night. Restrain him.
This is the fourth elegy. This poem is really extraordinary. It's like an X-ray of the cosmos or something. Never read anything like it. The fourth elegy. O trees of light, when does your winter come? We are not in harmony. Our blood does not forewarn us like migratory birds' blood, I guess. Late overtaken, we force ourselves abruptly onto the wind and fall to earth at some iced over lake. Flowering and fading come to us both at once. And somewhere lions still roam and never know in their majestic power of any weakness. But we, while we are intent upon one object, already feel the pull of another. Conflict is second nature to us. Aren't lovers always arriving at each other's boundaries, although they promised vastness, hunting, home? As when, for some quick sketch, a wide background of contrast is laboriously prepared so that we can see more clearly, we never know the actual vital contour of our own emotions, just what forms them from outside. Who has not sat afraid before his heart's curtain? It rose, the scenery of farewell, easy to recognize, the well-known garden, which swayed a little. Then the dancer came, not him, enough. However lightly he moves, he's costumed, made up, an ordinary man who hurries home and walks in through the kitchen. I won't endure these half-filled human masks. Better the puppet. It at least is full. I'll put up with the stuffed skin, the wire, the face that is nothing but appearance. Here, I'm waiting. Even if the lights go out, even if someone tells me that's all, even if emptiness floats toward me in a gray draft from the stage, even if not one of my silent ancestors stays seated with me, not one woman, not the boy with the immovable brown eye, I'll sit here anyway. One can always watch. Am I not right? You to whom life tasted so bitter after you took a sip of mine, the first gritty infusion of my will, Father, who, as I grew up, kept on tasting and troubled by the aftertaste of so strange a future, searched my unfocused gaze. You who so often since you died have trembled for my well-being, within my deepest hope relinquishing that calmness which the dead feel as their very essence, countless realms of equanimity for my scrap of life. Tell me, am I not right? And you, dear women, who must have loved me for my small beginning of love toward you, which I always turned away from because the space in your features grew, changed, even while I loved it, into cosmic space where you no longer were. Am I not right to feel as if I must stay seated, must wait before the puppet stage, or rather gaze at it so intensely that at last, to balance my gaze, an angel has to come and make the stuffed skins startle into life? angel and puppet, a real play finally, then what we separate by our very presence can come together. And only then the whole cycle of transformation will arise out of our own life seasons. Above, beyond us, the angel plays. If no one else, the dying must notice how unreal, how full of pretense is all that we accomplish here, where nothing is allowed to be itself. Oh, hours of childhood when behind each shape more than the past appeared. And what streamed out before us was not the future. We felt our bodies growing and were at times impatient to be grown up, half for the sake of those with nothing left but their grown-upness. Yet were, when playing by ourselves, enchanted with what alone endures. And we would stand there in the infinite blissful space between world and toy at a point which, from the earliest beginning, had been established for a pure event. Who shows a child as he really is? Who sets him in his constellation and puts the measuring rod of distance in his hand? Who makes his death out of gray bread, which hardens, or leaves it there inside his round mouth, jagged as the core of a sweet apple? Murderers are easy to understand, but this, that one can contain death, the whole of death, even before life has begun, can hold it to one's heart gently and not refuse to go on living, is inexpressible.
Fifth elegy, dedicated to Frau Herta Koenig. But tell me, who are they, these travelers, even a little more fleeting than we ourselves, so urgently ever since childhood, wrung by an, oh, for the sake of whom, never contented will, that keeps on wringing them, bending them, slinging them, swinging them, throwing them, and catching them back, as though from an oily, smoother air they come down on the threadbare carpet, thinned by their everlasting upspringing, this carpet forlornly lost in the cosmos, laid on like a plaster, as though the suburban sky had entered the earth there, and hardly there, upright, showing us the great initial letter of bareness. Even then, the strongest men are rolled once in sport by the ever-returning grasp, as once by Augustus the Strong, a tin platter on table. Alas, and round this center the rows of on-looking blooms and unblooms, round this pistol, caught by its own dust pollen and fertilized over again to a sham fruit of boredom, their own never realized, so thinly surfaced, gleaming, lightly sham smiling boredom. There, the withered, wrinkled lifter, now old and only drumming, shriveled up on his massive hide, as though it had once contained two men, and one were already lying in the churchyard, and this one here had survived him, deaf and sometimes a little lost in his widowed skin. And the younger man, like the son of a neck and a nun, so tautly and smartly filled with muscle and simpleness. Oh, you, a pain that was still quite small, received as a plaything once in one of its long convalescences. You, that fall with the thud only fruits know, unripe, daily 100 times from the tree of mutually built-up motion, the tree that, swifter than water, has spring and summer and autumn in so many minutes, fall and rebound on the grave. Sometimes, in half pauses, a tenderness tries to steal out over your face to your sullenly tender mother, but scatters over your body, whose surface quickly absorbs the timidly rippling, hardly attempted look. And again, that man is clapping his hands for the drowned spring, for the downward spring, and before a single pain has got within range of your ever galloping heart, comes the tingling in the soles of your feet, ahead of the spring that it springs from, chasing into your eyes a few physical tears. And still, all instinctive, that smile. Angel, oh, take it, pluck it, that small flowered herb of healing. Get a vase to preserve it. Sit it among those joys not yet open to us. In a graceful urn, praise it with florally soaring inscription, Subricio Salat. Then you, my darling, mutely elated by the most exquisite joys, perhaps your frills are happy on your behalf, or over your tight young breasts, the green metallic silk feels itself endlessly spoiled and in need of nothing. You, time after time, upon all of the quivering scale pans of balance, freshly laid fruit of serenity, publicly shown among shoulders. Where, oh, where in the world is that place in my heart where they still were far from being able, still fell away from each other like mounting animals, yet ready for pairing, where weights are still heavy, and hoops still stagger away from their vainly twirling sticks. And then, in this wearisome nowhere, all of a sudden, the ineffable spot where the pure too little incomprehensibly changes, veering into what empty too much? Where are the many-digited sum that solves into zero? Squares, zero square in Paris, infinite showplace. Where the modiste Madame Lamorte winds and binds the restless ways of the world, those endless ribbons to ever new creations of bow, frill, flower, cockade, and fruit, all falsely colored to deck the cheap winter hats of fate. Angel, suppose there's a place we know nothing about, and there on some indescribable carpet lovers showed all that here they're forever unable to manage. Their daring, lofty figures of heart flight, their towers of pleasure, their ladders long since, where ground never was, just quiveringly propped by each other, were able to manage it there, before the ring onlookers there, countless unmurmuring dead. Would not those then fling their last, there forever reserved, ever concealed, unknown to us, ever valid coins of happiness, down before the at last truthfully smiling pair of quivered carpet?
The sixth elegy. Fig tree, for such a long time I have found meaning in the way you almost completely omit your blossoms and urge your pure mystery, unproclaimed, into the early ripening fruit. Like the curved pipe of a fountain, your arching boughs drive the sap downward and up again. And almost without awakening, it bursts out of sleep into its sweetest achievement, like the god stepping into the swan. But we still linger, alas, we whose pride is in blossoming. We enter the overdue interior of our final fruit and are already betrayed. In only a few does the urge to action rise up so powerfully that they stop, glowing in their heart's abundance, while, like the soft night air, the temptation to blossom touches their tender mouths, touches their eyelids softly. Heroes, perhaps, and those chosen to disappear early, whose veins death the gardener twists into a different pattern. These plunge on ahead in advance of their own smile, like the team of galloping horses before the triumphant pharaoh in the mildly hollowed reliefs at Karnak. The hero is strangely close to those who died young. Permanence does not concern him. He lives in continual ascent, moving on into the ever-changed constellation of perpetual danger. Few could find him there, but fate, which is silent about us, suddenly grows inspired and sings him into the storm of his onrushing world. I hear no one like him. All at once, I am pierced by his darkened voice, carried on the streaming air. Then, how gladly I would hide from the longing to be once again, oh, a boy once again with my life before me, to sit leaning on future arms and reading of Samson how from his mother first nothing, then everything was born. Wasn't he a hero inside you, mother? Didn't his imperious choosing already begin there in you? Thousands seethed in your womb, wanting to be him. But look, he grasped and excluded, chose and prevailed. And if he demolished pillars, it was when he burst from the world of your body into the narrow world, where again he chose and prevailed. O mothers of heroes, O sources of ravaging floods, you ravines into which virgins have plunged, lamenting from the highest rim of the heart, sacrifices to the sun. But whenever the hero stormed through the stations of love, each heartbeat intended for him lifted him up beyond it. And turning away, he stood there at the end of all smiles, transfigured.
The seventh elegy. Wooing no longer. Wooing will not be the form of your cry, voice that's outgrown it. True, you would cry pure as a bird when the season lifts him, the ascending one, almost forgetting that he is a suffering creature and not just a solitary heart that it flings into brightness to intimate heavens. Like him, you also would be wooing no less, so that, still invisible, some girl would sense you, the silent one, in whom a reply slowly wakes and grows warm as she listens. The glowing feeling mated to your dark, daring feeling. Oh, and the springtime would comprehend there is no place that would not echo its voice of proclamation. First, the tiny questioning piping that a purely affirmative day surrounds more deeply with heightened stillness. Then up the stairway of calling, up to the dreamed of temple of future. Then the trill, fountain that in its rising jet already anticipates falling in promises play. And the summer to come. Not only the devotion of these unfolded forces, not only the paths, not only the evening fields, not only, after a late storm, the breathing freshness, not only approaching sleep and a premonition, evenings, also the nights, also the high summer nights, also the stars of this earth. Oh, to be dead at last and know them eternally, all the stars. For how to forget them? See, I was calling my lover. But not only she would come, girls would come from delicate graves and gather. For how could I limit the call, once called? The buried always still seek the earth. You, children, a single thing grasped here is many times valid. Don't think that fate is more than a childhood across. How often you overtook the beloved, panting after the blissful chase, after nothing into what's free. Being here is the wonder. You knew it, girls, even you who seemed dispensable, sunken, you in the worst streets of the cities, festering or open for refuse. Since an hour was given, perhaps not so much as an hour, one that was scarcely measurable by time's measure, between two moments where you had a being. Everything, veins filled with being. But we forget so easily what our laughing neighbor neither acknowledges nor envies. We want to visibly show it, while even the most visible of joys can only display itself to us when we have changed it from within. Nowhere, beloved, will world be but within. Our life passes in change, and ever shrinking, the outer diminishes. Where there was once a permanent house, some conceptual sculpture springs up, athwart us, as fully at home among concepts as if it still stood in the brain. Vast reservoirs of power are created by the spirit of the age, formless, like the tense yearning gained from all things. Temples are no longer known. Those extravagances of the heart we keep more secretly. Yes, where even one survives, a single thing once prayed to, served, knelt before, it stands as it is already there in the invisible. Many no longer see it, but lose the chance to build it inside themselves now, with columns and statues, grander. Each vague turn of the world has such disinherited ones, to whom the former does not, and the next does not yet belong. Since even the next is far from mankind, though this should not confuse us, but strengthen in us the keeping of still recognizable forms. This once stood among men, stood in the midst of fate, the destroyer, stood in the midst of not knowing towards what, as if it existed, and drew stars toward itself out of the enshrined heavens. Angel, I'll show it to you also there. It will stand in your gaze, finally upright, saved at last. Columns, pylons, the Sphinx, the stirring thrust of the cathedral, gray, out of a fading or alien cry. Was it not a miracle? Oh, be astonished, angel, since we are this. Oh, tell them, oh great one, that we could achieve this. My breath is too slight for praising. So after all, we have not failed to make use of these spaces, these generous ones, our spaces. How frighteningly vast they must be when they are not overfull of our feelings after thousands of years. But a tower was great, was it not? Oh, angel, it was though, even compared to you. Chart was great, and music towered still higher and went beyond us. Why, even a girl in love, oh, alone in the night at her window, did she not reach to your knees? Don't think that I'm wooing. Angel, were I doing so, you would not come, since my call is always full of outpouring. Against such a powerful current you cannot advance. Like an outstretched arm, my call, and its hand, opened above for grasping, remains open before you, as if for defense and for warning, wide open, incomprehensible one.
The 8th elegy, dedicated to Rudolf Kasner. With all its eyes, the natural world looks out into the open. Only our eyes are turned backward and surround plant, animal, child like traps as they emerge into their freedom. We know what is really out there only from the animal's gaze. For we take the very young child and force it around so that it sees objects, not the open, which is so deep in animals' faces, free from death. We only can see death. The free animal has its decline in back of it forever, and God in front. And when it moves already in eternity like a fountain. Never, not for a single day, do we have before us that pure space into which flowers endlessly open. Always there is world and never nowhere without the no, that pure, unseparated element which one breathes without desire and endlessly knows. A child may wander there for hours through the timeless stillness, may get lost in it and be shaken back. Or someone dies and is it. For nearing death, one doesn't see death, but stares beyond, perhaps with an animal's vast gaze. Lovers, if the beloved were not there blocking the view, are close to it and marvel, as if by some mistake it opens for them behind each other. But neither can move past the other, and it changes back to world. Forever turned toward objects, we see in them the mere reflection of the realm of freedom which we have dimmed. Or when some animal mutely, serenely looks us through and through. That is what fate means, to be opposite and nothing else, forever. If the animal moving toward us so securely in a different direction had our kind of consciousness, it would wrench us around and drag us along its path. But it feels its life as boundless, unfathomable, and without regard to its own condition, pure like its outward gaze. And where we see the future, it sees all time and itself within all time, forever healed. Yet in the alert, warm animal, there lies the pain and burden of an enormous sadness. For it too feels the presence of what often overwhelms us, a memory, as if the element we keep pressing toward were once more intimate, more true, and our communion infinitely tender. Here all is distance, there it was breath. After that first home, the second seems ambiguous and drafty. Oh, bliss of the tiny creature which remains forever inside the womb that was its shelter. Joy of the gnat which still within leaps up even at its marriage, for everything is womb. And look at the half assurance of the bird, which knows both inner and outer from its source, as if it were the soul of an Etruscan flown out of a dead man, received inside a space, but with his reclining image as the lid. And how bewildered is any womb-born creature that has to fly, as if terrified and fleeing from itself, it zigzags through the air the way a crack runs through a teacup. So the bat quivers across the porcelain of evening, and we spectators, always, everywhere, turn toward the world of objects, never outward. It fills us. We arrange it, it breaks down, we rearrange it, then break down ourselves. Who has twisted us around like this, so that no matter what we do, we are in the posture of someone going away, just as upon the farthest hill, which shows him his whole valley, one last time, he turns, stops, lingers. So we live here, forever taking leave.
The 9th elegy. Why, if this interval of being can be spent serenely in the form of a laurel, slightly darker than all other green, with tiny waves on the edges of every leaf, like the smile of a breeze, why then have to be human and, escaping from fate, keep longing for fate? Oh, not because happiness exists, that too hasty profit snatched from approaching loss, not out of curiosity, not as practice for the heart, which would exist in the laurel too, but because truly being here is so much, because everything here apparently needs us. This fleeting world, which in some strange way keeps calling to us, the most fleeting of all. Once for each thing, just once, no more. And we too, just once, and never again. But to have been this once completely, even if only once, to have been at one with the earth, seems beyond undoing. And so we keep pressing on, trying to achieve it, trying to hold it firmly in our simple hands, in our overcrowded gaze, in our speechless heart, trying to become it. Whom can we give it to? We would hold on to it all forever. But what can we take along into that other realm? Not the art of looking, which is learned so slowly, and nothing that happened here. Nothing. The sufferings then, and above all, the heaviness and the long experience of love. Just what is wholly unsayable. But later among the stars, what good is it? They are better as they are, unsayable. For when the traveler returns from the mountain slopes into the valley, he brings not a handful of earth, unsayable to others, but instead some word he has gained, some pure word, the yellow and blue gentian. Perhaps we are here in order to say, house, bridge, fountain, gate, pitcher, fruit tree, window, at most column, tower. But to say them, you must understand. Oh, to say them more intensely than the things themselves ever dreamed of existing. Isn't the secret intent of this taciturn earth, when it forces lovers together, that inside their boundless emotion, all things may shudder with joy? Threshold, what it means for two lovers to be wearing down imperceptibly the ancient threshold of their door. They too, after the many who came before them and before those to come, lightly. Here is the time for the sayable. Here is its homeland. Speak and bear witness. More than ever, the things that we might experience are vanishing. For what crowds them out and replaces them is an imageless act, an act under a shell which easily cracks open as soon as the business inside outgrows it and seeks new limits. Between the hammers, our heart endures, just as the tongue does between the teeth, despite that, still able to praise. Praise this world to the angel, not the unsayable one. You can't impress him with the glorious emotion. In the universe where he feels more powerfully, you are a novice. So show him something simple, which formed over generations, lives as our own, near our hand and within our gaze. Tell him of things. He will stand astonished, as you stood by the rope maker in Rome, or the potter along the Nile. Show him how happy a thing can be, how innocent and ours, how even lamenting grief purely decides to take form, serves as a thing, or dies into a thing, and blissfully escapes far beyond the violin. And these things, which live by perishing, knows you are praising them. Transient, they look to us for deliverance. Us, the most transient of all. They want us to change them utterly in our invisible heart within, oh, endlessly within us. whoever we may be at last. Earth, isn't this what you want to arise within us, invisible? Isn't it your dream to be wholly invisible someday? Oh, Earth, invisible. What if not transformation is your urgent command? Earth, my dearest, I will. Oh, believe me, you no longer need your springtimes to win me over. One of them, even one is already too much for my blood. Unspeakably, I have belonged to you from the first. You were always right, and your holiest inspiration is our intimate companion, death. Look, I am living. On what? Neither childhood nor future grows any smaller. Superabundant being wells up in my heart.
I will read the first page of the 10th elegy in the German original, then the entire piece in English. I will end by reading the final stanza again in Rilke's mother tongue. Die 10. Elegie. Dass ich dereinst an dem Ausgang der grimmigen Einsicht Jubel und Ruhm aufsinge zustimmenden Engeln, dass von den klargeschlagenen Hämmern des Herzens keiner versage an weichen, zweifelnden oder reißenden Seiten, dass mich mein strömendes Antlitz glänzender mache, dass das unscheinbare Weinen blühe. Oh, wie werdet ihr dann, Nächte, mir lieb sein, Gehärmte, dass ich euch kniender nicht, untröstliche Schwestern, hinnahm, nicht in euer gelöstes Haar mich gelöster ergab. Wir, Vergeuder der Schmerzen, wie wir sie voraussehen voraus in die traurige Dauer, ob sie nicht enden vielleicht. Sie aber sind ja unser winterwähriges Laub, unser dunkles Sinngrün, eine der Zeiten des heimlichen Jahres. Nicht nur Zeit, sind Ställe, Siedlung, Lager, Boden, Wohnort. Freilich wehe, wie fremd sind die Gassen der Leitstadt, wo in der falschen, aus Übertönung gemachten Stille stark aus der Gussform des Leeren der Ausguss prahlt, der vergoldete Lärm, das platzende Denkmal. Oh, wie spurlos zerträte ein Engel ihnen den Trostmarkt, den die Kirche begrenzt, ihre fertig gekaufte. Reinlich und zu und enttäuscht wie ein Postamt am Sonntag. Draußen aber kräuseln sich immer die Ränder von Jahrmarkt, Schaukeln der Freiheit, Taucher und Gaukler des Eifers und des behübschten Glücks, figürliche Schießstadt, wo es zappelt von Ziel und sich blechern benimmt, wenn ein Geschickterer trifft. Von Beifall zu Zufall taumelt er weiter, den Buden jeglicher Neugier werben, trommeln und plärren. Für Erwachsene aber ist noch Besonderes zu sehen, wie sich das Geld vermehrt, anatomisch. Nicht zur Belustigung nur, der Geschlechtsteil des Gelds, alles, das Ganze, der Vorhang, das unterrichtet und macht fruchtbar. The 10th Elegy. Someday, emerging at last from the violent inside, let me sing jubilation and praise to assenting angels. Let not even one of the clearly struck hammers of my heart fail to sound because of a slack, a doubtful, or a broken string. Let my joyfully streaming face make me more radiant. Let my hidden weeping arise and blossom. How dear you will be to me then, you nights of anguish. Why didn't I kneel more deeply to accept you, inconsolable sisters, and surrendering, lose myself in your loosened hair? How we squander our hours of pain. How we gaze beyond them into the bitter duration to see if they have an end, though they are really our winter enduring foliage, our dark evergreen, one season in our inner year, not only season in time, but a place and settlement, foundation and soil and home. But how alien, alas, are the streets of the city of grief, where in the false silence formed of continual uproar, the figure cast from the mold of emptiness stoutly swaggers. The gilded noise, the bursting memorial. Oh, how completely an angel would stamp out their market of solace, bounded by the church with its ready-made consolations, clean and disenchanted and shut as a post office on Sunday. Farther out, though, the city's edges are curling with carnival, swings of freedom, divers and jugglers of zeal, and the shooting gallery's targets of prettified happiness, which jump and kick back with a tinny sound when hit by some better marksman. From cheers to chants, he goes staggering on as booth with all sorts of attractions are wooing, drumming, and bawling. For adults only, there is something special to see. How money multiplies, naked, right there on stage. Money's genitals, nothing concealed, the whole action, educational and guaranteed to increase your potency. Oh, but a little farther beyond the last of the billboards, plastered with signs for deathless, that bitter beer which seems so sweet to its drinkers as long as they chew fresh distractions in between sips. Just in back of the billboard, just behind, the view becomes real. Children are playing and lovers are holding hands to the side solemnly in the meager grass. And dogs are doing what is natural. The young man is drawn on farther. Perhaps he is in love with the young lament. He comes out behind her into the meadows. She says, "It's a long walk. We live way out there." Where, and the youth follows, he's touched by her manner, her shoulders, her neck. Perhaps she is of noble descent. But he leaves her, turns around, looks back, waves. What's the use? She is a lament. Only those who died young, in their first condition of timeless equanimity, while they're being weaned, follow her lovingly. She waits for girls and befriends them, shows them gently what she is wearing, pearls of grief and the fine spun veils of silence. With young men, she walks in silence. But there in the valley where they live, one of the elder laments answers the youth when he questions her. Long ago, she says, we laments were a powerful race. Our forefathers worked the mines up there in the mountain range. Sometimes even among men, you can find a polished nugget of primal grief, or a chunk of petrified rage from the slag of an ancient volcano. Yes, that came from up there. We used to be rich. And gently she guides him through the vast landscape of lament, shows him the pillars of the temples and the ruined walls of those castles from which long ago the princes of lament wisely ruled the land, shows him the tall trees of tears and the fields of blossoming grief. The living know it just as a mild green shrub, shows him the herds of sorrow grazing, and sometimes a startled bird flying low from their upward gaze, far away traces the image of its solitary cry. In the twilight, she leads him out to the graves of the elders who gave warning to the race of laments, the Sibyls and prophets. But as night approaches, they move more softly, and soon the sepulchre rises up like a moon watching over everything. Brother to the one on the Nile, the lofty sphinx, the taciturn chamber's countenance. And they look in wonder at the regal head that has silently lifted the human face to the scale of the stars forever. Still dizzy from recent death, his sight cannot grasp it, but her gaze frightens an owl from behind the rim of the crown, and the bird, with slow down strokes, brushes along the cheek, the one with the fuller curves. And faintly, in the dead youth's new sense of hearing, as upon a double unfolded page, it sketches the indescribable outline. And higher the stars, the new stars of the land of grief. Slowly, the lament names them. Look, there, the rider, the staff, and the larger constellation called garland of fruit. Then farther up toward the pole, cradle, path, the burning book, puppet, window, but there in the southern sky, pure as the lines on the palm of a blessed hand, the clear, sparkling M that stands for mothers. But the dead youth must go on by himself, and silently the elder lament takes him as far as the ravine, where shimmering in the moonlight is the fountainhead of joy. With reverence, she names it and says, among men, it is a mighty stream. They stand at the foot of the mountain range, and she embraces him, weeping. Alone, he climbs on, up the mountains of primal grief, and not once do his footsteps echo from the soundless path. But if the endlessly dead awakened a symbol in us, perhaps they would point to the catskins hanging from the bare branches of the hazel trees, or would evoke the raindrops that fall onto the dark earth in springtime. And we, who have always thought of happiness as rising, would feel the emotion that almost overwhelms us whenever a happy thing falls. Und wir, die an steigendes Glück denken, empfinden die Rührung, die uns beinahe bestürzt, wenn ein glückliches fällt.
Thank you all. Thank you all for this radiant reading. You took us into the cathedral, and it was tender and exalting, at least for me. I'm deeply grateful for all of your different voices and your understanding of this great work. In some odd way, it's very soothing. And I'm looking at the clock. We have 3 minutes. I don't know if Jennifer's there, but Jennifer, we have 3 minutes left. Do you want to take a few more minutes, or do you want us to end at 2 o'clock? Because we can do.
Very happy for you guys to take more time.
Okay, well then let's just.
Deserves some unpacking.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And before we go around, let's just go around in the way that we did the reading. If you can remember who's first, you've got a list there, and just say a few words if you would like. And before we go on, I would just like to say one thing. I think it's very amazing to be living in the motion picture home and to have Jennifer Clymer, who asked me to do this poetry hour, and her support, along with Bob Beecher, the CEO's support, is really, really an amazing opportunity for great works as this to be presented with so many great readers. This is an all-star cast, and it kind of reminds me of the last couple lines of Horace's poem to Menelaus, his ode, where he says something like, Menelaus was his patron. He said, if you truly would say, I am among the poets, I would knock my head against the exalted stars, or I would knock my exalted head against the stars. But we have such great people that work here to help all of us continue our creative lives. So let's, having said that, let's start. If Paul Vangelisi is here, there he is, and just each one of us take a couple of minutes and say a few sentences about your experience reading this or about the work itself. Please, Paul.
Yes, about halfway through, my connection failed, but I heard you all. I disappeared, but I heard you all, and you said it, Harry. It's a very moving experience, very moving experience.
Phoebe?
This is an extraordinary thing for me. I spent the week reading the Duino Elegies, and then going through them, and then reading an analysis, and then going through 10 lines, and then an analysis. And I was thrilled by doing this, and by the whole idea of this primordial angelic force within us and with the universe that goes out and then comes back and is that which is whole. And that our job here is to say things, to give voice to this world, which for us can never be whole because we are always departing. It's really beautiful.
Jim Cushing?
Whenever I'm reading a poem in any kind of context like this, I'm always startled by how accurately it resonates with something that's going on in the deepest, most personal layers of my life, and the mother imagery in the third elegy was enormously powerful to me this last time, and also the material toward the end about how the sleeper must fall in love with the dark parts of himself. I found that some of the more remarkably astute spiritual psychological insights to be had in modern poetry. And I thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this event. It's a sublimely beautiful event.
Aram?
I have been reading Rilke over the years without ever really getting to the very core of it, which this seems to do. And I was just blown away by it, especially the configuration of life, death as some kind of eternity. So that I was reading about Jamaican Rastafarian culture where they don't distinguish between the dead and the living. They're each part and parcel of each other. And I guess they call them the departed ghosts, but they play on the living and the living back to them. And the ghosts can dream the living and vice versa. And it seems to me, I mean, I've had deaths in my family and they go on. They're around. And it's hard to get it. And this poem just exalts that condition. I really loved it. And thank you, Harry, for bringing it to us.
Richard?
I want to echo what Aram just said. Thank you for putting this together, and thank you for inviting me. I researched the background of the composition of the poem in preparation for this, and what struck me is all of the surrounding events that he brought into the poem that, although they were particular to that period, they nonetheless, I mean, transformed by poetry, they become eternal in a manner of speaking. And he, for the fifth elegy, he evidently composed this in the presence of a painting of his hostess, Herta Kennigs, to whom that elegy is dedicated. And that I can see, I looked up that painting online, you can find it online. And I could see how he brought that into there as not only an inspiration for that elegy, but drawing on the sort, or more accurately, free associating on the imagery of that painting, which all feeds into that particular elegy. So, and fitting it in with, it's right in the center, and it's sort of a pivotal one, because it's sort of, I kind of saw it as like a tentpole for things are leading up to that, and they're coming down from that, and then sort of referring back to it in the final crescendo of the 10th elegy. So it was great hearing other people read their parts of it, and it is a different experience hearing it read out loud. So once again, thank you all of the readers that participated in this, and thank you, Harry.
Garrett?
Yeah, thank you, Harry, and thank you all. It was a magnanimous, quite moving. I did the one thought, it just kind of occurred as Richard was speaking. This piece, I think I you know, dating back to I don't know if it was I think it was in Rilke's letter to a young poet, you know, to live the questions into the answers, and that sense of him that it's very comforting. This kind of non-dual, this entering the non-dual, and not, you know, and I think Aram touched on that, not separate things out, but I mean, that it really spoke to me today, and I also loved hearing the German, so and I have a bias there. Thank you, Harry, very much.
Bob?
Harry, thank you, and thank all of you for allowing me to participate in this group. I want to give a special shout out to Richard's cat, and to Richard himself for not missing a single word as his cat passed back and forth in front of his computer. It was beautiful. You know, I've read this many times in the past, but read it to myself, and I think it's sort of like humming a song to yourself. And then I think Paul said this at the beginning, having it read aloud is just such a different experience. And this is just you realize just how magnificently complex it is, how there are recurring themes that you didn't see before, images, ideas. they all just kind of manifest or crystallize themselves when you have the opportunity to sit back and have the music and the words come at you and into you from other people. So just a wonderful experience for me. And thank you all, your beautiful different voices, the German reading, just magnificent. I just would add one thing real quick. When I was in my senior year of college and in graduate school, I was inspired by Rilke to take some German language courses, thinking that one day I would try to translate his poetry. And I got about 4 lines into one poem and decided, maybe Yiddish would be a better direction for me to go.
Bill.
Each of these elegies is so intense that to read them one after another and then to read all 10 in sort of one sitting is for me impossible. So this is the first time that I've ever had that experience. I mean, I think it might be easier to watch all of King Lear without intermission if you were trying to read it by yourself. So there was to be nourished by all these different voices reading the poem enabled me to actually experience it as a whole. And this was a real gift from poets to a poet. And I want to thank you all very much. My only regret is that Holly Prado couldn't be here to be part of this reading and to listen to all of us as a community. But thank you, Harry. And thank you very much, Jennifer.
Corinne?
Well, it's wonderful to hear all the poets give their discussion of these elegies. Unfortunately, I've never read all 10. I've now ordered them from Amazon, but I only had mine, and Harry sent me the 8th one, so I'd be ready to speak. But I found, unfortunately, as I was listening to it, how every elegy before my 9th kind of informed my 9th. It all kind of blended in. I had so much more understanding of really what I was reading after hearing the ones previous to me. And it was wonderful to hear it in German. Beautiful. Something that is, I guess I've heard that German can be very beautiful. I've never actually experienced it until now. I thought it sounded I kind of got the feeling from the elegies in your reading. It was great. I know I read somewhere that you can't just read a Rilke poem, you have to meditate on each line. And I had that feeling when I was reading mine. When I was, researching it and trying to get the meaning. Yes, you have to kind of meditate on each line. There seems to be so much there. But I understand it so much more now after hearing it all together. Thank you for that.
Marie?
Well, first of all, thank you, Harry, so much for inviting me to participate in this reading. And of course, it was a particular pleasure to read part of it in Rilke's mother tongue and my own. And then to read it in English and feel the difference that it brings to me and for me. In hearing the 10 elegies altogether, I'm again reminded that they all each poem stands on its own, and they're interdependent. In the 10th elegy, the one that I read, what is particularly striking to me is how thin the veil is for Rilke between the living and the dead, between life and death. and how even the young youth who has died, how he's guided into this next life, into this next world. So again, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this event.
Well, this has been a very tender and transformational reading, and I know it's time for Jennifer Clymer to move on with her creative chaos. She's been doing 4 days a week shows for probably 14 or 15 months ever since COVID-19 hit, and she's just the perfect host for and perfect demeanor and intelligence for doing these shows. So thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all once again.
Blush, Harry. You make me blush. I also wanted to say, this is episode 212 of Creative Chaos, and I want to say close to the 60th episode of Harry's Poetry Hour.
Yes.
Very, very special to have you all on, and I do hope that you come back and help to celebrate poetry through Harry's show. But to hear the German, to hear this in the mother tongue was breathtaking. Thank you.